which I've done, and I think I've switched on the captions as well. Yeah, so welcome to the call, everyone. I'll just share my slides for a bit. Good to see you all. Okay, I should be sharing. Someone shout at me if you can't see the screen. As I flip to the agenda, the sort of key thing we're focused on this week, we're going to do an IETF 124 preview. So that's the meeting that kicks off next week. That's in Montreal. The pictures are in New York because I'm in New York at the moment, sort of en route to Montreal, and did a few sort of touristy things yesterday, just walking around because it's quite nice sunshine. Top tip, by the way, for anyone coming into the US at the moment, because of the government sort of shutdown, which I must admit I hadn't given any thought about, the queues at immigration are quite lengthy, even compared to usual, because there's a lot less staff working currently. So it was a joy to land in New York and have an hour and a half roughly in the queue. It was frustrating because I could have used my global entry where there was no queue at all, but because my wife and daughter were with me, I think they would have been a little bit unhappy if I just left them to it. Tempting though that was when you saw the length of the queue. Anyway, so I digress. We're going to talk about the IETF 124 meeting, just highlight some of the interesting stuff on the agenda, then touch on the AWS outage of last week and discuss whether it was or whether it is or isn't always the DNS. And then depending on time, we may touch on a few other sort of interesting things from the news from the last week, etc. Right, so with that in mind then, I will launch straight into this. If anyone's got any questions or comments, particularly if you think I've overlooked anything interesting on the agenda as we go through, do interrupt me. And because I've got two screens, if you raise your virtual hand, I may not notice. So if I carry on regardless, feel free to unmute and tell me. Just as a reminder, the meeting kicks off this coming weekend with the hackathon on Monday, so on Saturday and Sunday. The new participants sort of day takes place largely on the Sunday, so there's plenty of good stuff on the Sunday, and a few other bits and pieces which I'll mention in a second, and then the meeting proper Monday through Friday of next week at the Queen Elizabeth Fairmont in sort of the centre of Montreal. If you haven't registered, it's not too late. You will be paying the full registration rate because that you missed the early bird rate from which I think ceased last week. You can join remotely, and as always, there are unlimited, no questions asked, fee waivers for anyone that would want to join but is unable to pay for the remote access. When I looked yesterday evening, local time, there were a little under 1,400 people registered, just over 900 on site, and 450 planning to join remotely. So quite a decent number overall. Right, in terms of the agenda, as I say, the hackathon, speak properly, runs on through Saturday and Sunday, with the sort of results from that presented midday on Sunday, as you can see. But also on Sunday, I've highlighted the sort of two parts of the new participant program, kicking off at 9:30 local time, running all the way through, looking at the second part of that to 3:30, and then there's a sort of quick connections for new participants also taking place between 4 and 5. You've got the IPG meets on Sunday morning between 10 and 12. So anyone that's in Montreal at the weekend, well worth going to. That usually picks up on operationally focused sort of topics. I couldn't find the agenda yet, which is why I haven't sort of referenced that on this slide. But it's usually an interesting, fairly relaxed some Sunday morning discussion. So quite a good way to get into the swing of things for the event. And then sort of more sort of properly, if you like, for the meeting proper, the welcome reception takes place between 5 and 7 p.m. On Sunday evening, and also the hot RFC session takes place between 6 and 8 p.m. So a bit of an overlap there, but that's quite a good place to get a heads up for some sort of new topics which are coming in to the IETF, largely in the side meeting. So bear that in mind. As I say, I'm going to plow through these, unless anyone interrupts me. I'm not going to go through everything because it takes far too long. But as always, I'm just going to run through the agenda in chronological order, calling out sessions that are likely to be of interest, depending on your sort of areas of interest, of course. On Monday, there's a combined dispatch session, sort of general dispatch and sec dispatch, with a range of topics on there. I've sort of highlighted a small number of those, sort of top right of the screen. So this is a subset of all of them that stood out to me. So Jim Mosley, who many of you will know from Infoblox, is talking about AI agent discovery. Gianpaolo, who's on the call, I know, is talking about customer-facing relay, which is, depending on your point of view, an alternative to or a complement to encrypted client hello, to give to protect the destination from, for example, a CDN. So to give a much better sort of user privacy than say ECH does, because that, although that protects your destination address from an observer, the CDN would certainly learn what it is. Various other things, including Stephen Farrell is putting together a draft with his take on guidance on post-quantum cryptography for IETF protocols, which I'm sure will provoke a debate between those people that think we should go straight into sort of post-quantum cryptography now, including on signatures, and those that maybe think there's still at least 10 years. So he's got a 10-minute slot. I think that one may overrun, but we'll see. Now, at the same time as that, in slot 1 on Monday, you'll see that DNS Ops has got the first of its 2 sessions for the week. And I've called out a number of things on there. I'm obviously not going to run through them all, but you can see them on the slide. That's not everything that's being discussed. That's the things I point out that looked interesting to me. So as always, DNS Ops has got a very busy agenda. Things like integration of DNS domain names into application environments, etc. Yeah, that's too much for me to usefully summarize, but there's a bunch of stuff of which that's a selection of it. So that's going to be a very busy, I suspect, 2 hours, which will keep the chairs on there. Keep the chairs busy to try and get to time. And as you will now clearly see, I'm only pulling out a subset of things. By the way, where I've highlighted sessions that look like they're going to be interesting, but without any suggestions on the content, that's because even though the meeting starts next week, not all the working group sessions have got published agendas yet. So I suspect, for example, on this slide, that the TLS session will be interesting, because it usually is, but the agenda's not available yet. So I can't be sure at this point. But Monday, session 3, the Human Rights Protocol Considerations Research Group. So that's one of the IRTF research groups, has got 2 presentations lined up. One on the Great Firewall Export, and the second one on the LockNet, how China controls its internet and why it matters. So obviously a theme there on the Great Firewall of China, with sort of 2 sort of effectively set piece presentations on the topic, no doubt with time for discussion with the presenters after each of their 2 slots. So I think that will be interesting. Also, in session 4, the IRTF itself has got its open meeting for the week, again with three talks lined up, two from the ANRP program, plus a third invited talk, as you can see, on video streaming. So, and then, as I say, I think the sort of TLS session will certainly be of interest, but they haven't firmed up on the agenda yet, so that's just a guess on my part. Finally, on Monday in the evening, there's a new participants dinner. A reminder that new participants in IETF Speak are typically people who've got up to 5 meetings under their belts. But if you've been more than 5 times, you probably don't count as a new participant anymore. But it's not policed heavily. That's largely a guide. Well worth going to if you're relatively new to the IETF, but you do need to pre-register for it. So do bear that in mind. Okay, jumping into Tuesday, I've only pulled out from the first 2 sessions 2 things. One is SPICE, Secure Patterns for Internet Credentials, which is likely to provide useful guidance for the planned EU ID system, and they're sort of on the agenda amongst other things. They've got use cases for SPICE and also call for adoption for a paper which will be discussed during the meeting. And then Tuesday session 2. So just move these around on my screen. Procon, process documentation, sort of document consolidation, sorry, which is one of the working groups largely handling some of the IETF procedural activity to try and streamline some of the existing documents into a more manageable form. Rich Sales, I know, has done some authoring of that, and so that's, I think, going to be the bulk of the agenda for Procon this time round. Is just working through some of the documentation and trying to sort of update and streamline some of the existing materials to make it a little bit less sort of spread out across multiple different documents. Okay, just moving on. I'll pause probably at the end of Tuesday, see if anyone's got anything to add. Usually, I would recommend the top of the screen there, the Decentralization of the Internet Research Group, DNRG, which is, as the name suggests, focused on research around the impact of centralization and maybe researching some methods that could help to reverse the current trend. However, again, that's one where the agenda hasn't quite been finalized, so that will probably be worth going to, but I have to wait and see when that comes out. Failing that, one of the newer working groups, WebBot Auth, is taking place in the same time slot. I put at the top right of the screen there just a summary of some of the things that that's likely to cover, to give you a sense of what it's about, as it's still a relatively new working group, which is sort of methods for cryptographically authenticating automated clients and providing information about them to site operators. So very much an issue of the moment, given, as you'll recall, hopefully from the last IETF meeting, that some sites are seeing 30 to 50% of their traffic being driven by web crawlers, not by directly by humans. Having better support for that will be really useful. And then in sort of Tuesday session 4, MIMI, the More Instant Messaging Interoperability Working Group, should be good, but again, has yet to publish its agenda. But at the same time, one of the BOF's birds of a feather sessions is taking place for a potential future new working group. Goes by the name of Plant, which is short for PKI Logs and Tree Signatures. Which has been contrived into plants, which is quite impressive. And you'll see again on the slide what that's about. Sort of gives you a sense of what's planned. It doesn't have a chapter published yet, because obviously it's not a working group, but I took that from the sort of the draft charter discussion to give you a sense of what it might cover. Okay, let me pause there and see if anyone's got anything to add from the first sort of 2.5 days or so of the session. Just looking in the chat. Um, oh gosh, Tom, 47th birthday on Monday. Happy birthday in advance. Must have had a tough paper round, someone would probably say, if they were being unkind. Yeah, we will definitely have to celebrate that in Montreal next week. That sounds like a good thing to do. No one else is jumping in, so assume otherwise you're generally happy. So at which point I will move on to Wednesday. Again, you'll see I've highlighted a number of sessions.
You didn't mention the pass up thing on it's your own thing. You failed to mention it, didn't you?
Sorry, say again, Tom. I didn't mention.
Haven't we got pass up side meeting
Uh,
on?
uh, I will come on. Thank you. That's a helpful problem. I've not mentioned yet any side meetings from any. I will come on to the side meetings after I've gone through, if you like, the main agenda. But you're absolutely right. There are side meetings taking place at the same time as various of these sessions. Yes, sorry, I should have said that. I will come on to those next after I've gone through the, if you like, the main agenda. So yeah, uh, bear that in mind. Right, Wednesday then. Uh, there are three sessions I'm interested in, which again haven't published their agendas, but they're both. There's also a BOF taking place, the second one of the week, authenticated transfer, which is, as you can see, a generic framework of interoperable social web applications using self-certifying network data. Not the easiest thing to say. So it's a protocol partly in scope for the IETF, probably but it's also using protocols or has some relevance for elsewhere. So we'll have to wait and see whether there's sufficient in scope for the IETF that turns into an actual working group or not. But at the same time as that, there's RASP, the RASP research group, which is Research and Analysis of Standard Setting Processes research group. Um, but they haven't published their agenda yet. And then in session 2 on Wednesday, the drone remote ID protocol, one of the newer working groups, is taking place, but without yet its agenda, as is detecting unwanted location trackers. So that's giving you ways to discover and potentially disable hidden trackers. Air tags that have been so inadvertently left with you, for example. So that both of those taking place, but still haven't gotten around to finalising their agenda. So they may be interesting depending on what's finalised. Then ploughing on with Wednesday, we got the ADD, Adaptive DNS Discovery, taking place, and you can see at the top right corner some of the topics being discussed there, including a multi-cast DNS-based service discovery for encrypted DNS services, as well as extensions for encrypted DNS server negotiation. So two new drafts up for discussion, amongst other things. That's taking place at the same time as the TLS working group is meeting, but TLS, so that's the second slot for the TLS working group, but doesn't have its agenda publisher, as I mentioned earlier. Simultaneously, though, AI Preferences is meeting and will be working through open issues that are sort of on the mailing list and on, I think, on GitHub on its issues tracker. So that's again one of the very new working groups looking through how you express preferences to crawlers as a proposed extension, probably to robots.txt, but making it relevant to AI engines of different types. There's been quite a lively discussion on that working group's mailing list over the last many months, and they've had several interim meetings. So this will be a way to consolidate some of that and make progress in the sort of plenary on some of those. And speaking of plenaries, as traditionally is always the case, we round off Wednesday with the IETF plenary, which covers all of the usual business of the community. But we'll kick off with a greeting from the host, which this time around Comcast and NBC Universal. So many of you will know Glenn Dean. He will be welcoming everyone to Montreal on behalf of the hosts. And Sally Wentworth from the Internet Society will be given a John Postel Award as well. And then there'd be the normal administrative business. And I'm sure plenty of lively discussions at the mic around things like should we go to San Francisco, and potentially should we only meet 2 rather than 3 times a year in person as a community. So both of those I think, will be fairly hot topics for this community. And then moving to Thursday, the measurement and analysis for protocols research group, another IETF meeting, is meeting Thursday first thing in the morning, and you'll see a range of topics there. I won't talk through all of those, but and that's not everything that's being covered. But I think there's some quite interesting things there, as you can see, around things like post-quantum TLS deployment and observation measurement of HTTP2 during large-scale web crawls, etc. So plenty of stuff there. And actually, having just come from RIPE, the threat landscape of IP leasing, also interesting one. So yeah, I think that's going to be genuinely interesting research group session. And then that's in session 2. I've sort of called out the IB Open, which is usually has some good stuff, including this time round an IAB update. Then sort of liaison update on Etsy from Diego Lopez of Telefonica, who some of you will know, and also Mark Nottingham, one of the co-chairs of the recent age-restricted access to content workshop, is going to sort of just give a summary of that, which I know some of us were at that workshop, so it's going to be interesting to see what the co-chairs have pulled out as the points of interest. And then apparently there's going to be an invited talk, but it's still not finalized, or it's certainly not listed properly on the draft agenda. So I'm intrigued to see what that talk's going to be about. Then Thursday, later on in the day, the ops and management area open meeting was the thing that I called out as looking to be of interest, with a range of, again, I'm not going to read through all of these, you can read them quicker than I can. Interesting topics. There's plenty of other stuff there, but of less interest to me. And I should have also said, sorry, I've highlighted it, but I forgot to mention, there's over lunchtime, there's a sort of sisters lunch meeting taking place for the, I think, female and non-binary members of the community, and also at the same time there's a host speaker sort of a session as well. So I guess Comcast, NBC Universal will be giving a presentation on a topic of their choice. I didn't have anything that was especially interesting to me late Thursday, so I'll skip over that and say plenty though on Friday. There's a meeting of the Deleg working group looking at DNS delegation, and that's just a continuation of the sort of work they've had over the last few months. So there's some active discussion items on the mailing list. And there was also a side meeting before the start of the OARC meeting in Stockholm about 3 weeks ago. So plenty of current discussions there. And then all of the other things on that slide, is maybe not as clear as it could be, all relate to the second of the DNS Ops meetings, which you see towards the bottom of the slide. Again, emphasizing that it's a busy agenda for DNS Ops. So there's a whole load of stuff that they're going to cover around things like multiple algorithm rules in DNSSEC, how you can maybe indicate a domain is for sale, post-quantum cryptography strategy for DNS, etc., etc. So plenty of active topics there. There's also, I suspect, will be quite a lively discussion, despite it sounding maybe slightly very procedural. The moderation procedures working group in Friday session 2, which is, as the name entails, looking at how we moderate discussions on the mailing lists. There are people with strong opinions on that, so that could be quite lively, as well as the privacy enhancements and assessments research group. So those also taking place in the same time slot. But again, neither of those have published their agendas yet. But as I say, Mod Pod in particular, I expect will be quite lively. PEARG is usually pretty interesting as well. So you have to pick your favorite one if those are of interest to you too. And then finally, for me, session 3 on Friday, digital emblems, DM, as still relatively new working group, and its first proper meeting as a working group last time round in Madrid. So that's meeting again in Montreal. So that's looking at how we can do the digital equivalent of putting a sort of red cross or red crescent emblem on digital properties to protect them from attack in the event of war, etc. And then there's a farewell reception, as you can see, 4:45 to 5:45. So just to wrap up the meeting. But going back to Tom's very sensible point earlier, whilst all of that is happening, there are also a whole bunch of side meetings sort of running throughout the week. I've highlighted some that look interesting. So as you would expect, as happened in Madrid, quite a few with an AI theme. On Monday and Tuesday, as you can see, now the Duluth meeting room seats 40. If it's like the one in Madrid, hopefully there will be room for more than 40 people. And the AI themed meetings in Madrid certainly attracted a lot more than the number of seats. So there's people standing around the edges, sitting in the middle, etc. So I suspect the same will apply for Duluth. So if any of the AI themed side meetings are attractive to you, then get there early if you want to sit down. But in particular, it would be remiss of me not to mention that Tuesday at 7 p.m. local time, there's a meeting on PARSEP, which is a network protocol for parental controls, or at least a proposal that one should be developed for parental controls, which I'll be sort of hosting with other interested people. So it'd be good if to see you there if you're around. That's at the end of the sort of business on the main agenda, so it doesn't clash with any of the working group sessions. So no excuses not to go there. And then who knows, if you do go there, perhaps we can find some time afterwards to continue the discussion in a more comfortable setting over a beer or a glass of wine or whatever. So that's taking place on the Tuesday evening. On Wednesday, between 4 and 5 local time, I mentioned earlier that Gianpaolo has got something, a proposal for something as either alternative to or complement for ECH, source privacy and decentralization beyond ECH. So he's got a side meeting. So it's at the dispatch session on Monday morning and also in a side meeting on Wednesday. The dispatch sessions are typically only 10 minutes, so I think it'd be quite beneficial to have that on the Wednesday to have a better, more detailed discussion. So answering a question in the chat, there isn't an RFC as such yet, but there is a document which we sort of used or put together for the workshop on age-related restrictions on content. So I'll share a link to that along with a link to the recording after this call. Andreas just answered the question in the chat. Okay, just wrapping this up. I haven't highlighted any of these, but that continues through the week. Other side meetings, although as you can see, there's still quite a few open slots on the Thursday and Friday, particularly for the smaller of the two rooms on Thursday, and then Friday. No one has yet booked a side meeting. So if you have an aspiration to hold a side meeting, there are slots still available. You need to book those. So I just noticed that Simon has raised his hand. I have no idea. It just caught my eye, Simon. So did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just a background question, Andrew. Am I correct in remembering last time they did allow side meetings during the lunch hour? Because it looks like they have from block them this time, as all lunch hours are shown as unavailable.
So some of those things that are unavailable, that's because the rooms are being used for other purposes at various times. So as a random example, because I happen to know it, the Duluth on Friday between 8 and 9 is being used for an EODIR meeting. That's the Education and Outreach Directorate meeting. So I'm not certainly between 8 and 9 it's being used for that. So whether they're being used for non-com or other things, I'm not sure. But um, I know there used to be restrictions on not having side meetings during the sort of main agenda time, but I think that certainly has been eased up a while ago. So those restrictions are just because they've been allocated for other things through the week. So yeah,
Thank you.
I've answered the question. Right. I'll pause there unless anyone else has got any other questions on that. But hopefully, if not, that was sort of useful. It's given you a few pointers. But as you can see, even though it's the meeting starts next Monday, there's still quite a few slots yet to have the agendas finalised. So hopefully those will become available over the next few days. So you at least have some advance warning before the start of next week. Right. As I say, I'll pause there though. Then and before I go into some of the news headlines, so one of the big things last week was, and there was a sort of pretty major AWS outage, which had a knock-on effect on a lot of other services that were brought down at least for a few hours. And the suggestion was that inevitably it was the DNS that did it, because it always is the DNS, as you all know. But rather bravely, sort of Reddick reached out to me to sort of share with me his view that this time that's an unjustified accusation. So I'm going to hand over to him so he can tell us why he doesn't believe it was the DNS. And then anyone that feels differently can come in and have an interesting discussion on that. So Reddick and Kat, by the look of it, over to you.
Okay, so like everyone else, I started seeing the reports of this, and eventually AWS came out with a sort of interim explanation, and they did caution to wait. They're still investigating, but they cited DNS resolution as the initial issue. To myself and some others, a few others, what they were describing just didn't sound like DNS. Okay. For me, it sounded like something downstream of DNS from what they were describing. And I even said at the time, I feel this is automation. That's sounds more like of a possibility to me. Something's going on there, but we don't have enough information to go on. But then, as everyone saw, there was a whole slew of posts of experts saying, oh, it's DNS again. All of the media, newspaper articles, TV, all blaming DNS. And I just wasn't convinced. So I started to reply online and in various other areas saying, we don't know enough, etc. And I countered with the fact that DNS just doesn't simply behave that way, just deciding, or very rarely, to serve a different set of data or not serve something, etc. And then obviously Amazon finally released their own full explanation of what had occurred. And if we look at that analysis, okay, it tells us there are three systems. If you like, we'll call them System A, the DNS application. We've got System B, which was an automation system, split into two parts, and System C, which is the DynamoDB database. And that's, from what I can gather, the back end where the records are stored. System B, the automation, is responsible for taking that information and creating plans and putting them into DNS. There are actually two parts to it. There's an enactor which does that. And what actually happened, and this is fact from theirs, is the automation system hit a race condition, is what they described. And essentially what happened is a new update goes in to make sure it has the relevant records in DNS. One of the enactors then decide to overwrite that with an older plan, effectively deleting the information that should be there. It was made worse because the system responsible for putting in the new plan also carries out a check, and it's responsible for deleting old plans. It saw the old plan and deleted that. So we now have a condition where the old plan data is missing and the new plan data is missing. That was the root cause, automation, okay? And so how can we logically and factually say this is not DNS? Well, firstly, at no point did DNS application fail. There was no failure, all right? The issue occurred downstream of the DNS application. So it was affected by the automation issue, but not the cause of it, okay? And Amazon go on ad infinitum in their analysis to explain that to us, okay? The fixes also, if there was an issue with DNS, a fix or a mediation would have been put into DNS. There were no fixes applied to the DNS application, only to the automation system, okay? So by any measure of what I class as root cause analysis, DNS was affected, but it wasn't the root cause, okay? And for me, it's important, okay? If you don't have an accurate root cause, you'll be trying to fix something that isn't broken, okay? We also, and this is very critical for me, especially in the sort of media and wider community and so forth, if we just blame DNS, take the easy route, we miss the opportunity to discuss the true cause and understand it, mitigate it, so it doesn't happen again. There was a great opportunity to discuss the role of automation with DNS, but that's been missed in this sort of fog of it's DNS, it's always DNS. We end up, and this has happened so many times, and we end up losing confidence in DNS when it's not at fault, okay? That's important. We fail to learn lessons of that incident if we ascribe the cause to something it wasn't. And frankly, we're being lazy if we just sit back and say, yeah, okay, it was DNS. We only have to look at this slew of these uninformed AI-driven posts and so forth to realise how important it is to be factual and get it right. I can't criticise the AWS team, to locate a never before seen issue in their system, which is complex, remediate it and report it on a short time is exemplary. If I had any criticism, it's be careful with your language. And calling the system used to pull data from a database application and create a DNS plan of records and then update the DNS application, calling it DNS management is conflation and leads to this confusion. So that's my argument. It's not DNS.
And I can see in the chat, I think Vicky's sort of put put that nice and concisely, automation can help you make a mistake on a larger scale faster, which I think that rather neatly sums it up. So, yeah. So as I say, for others, sort of reached out to me the other day via LinkedIn, and I thought it made a fair point that it wasn't the DNS; it was being unfairly blamed this time round. And as you say, AWS put out a very good, in fact, Brett, sorry, is linked to, I think, in the chat as well, a good and detailed explanation, which I put briefly up on the screen earlier. I'll put back up in a second. Just to also explain what actually went wrong. So other than, as you say, it was called the sort of DNS configurator or whatever. It doesn't mean it was the DNS. It was the automation system that, or a series of coincidences that caused the problem. But anyone want to come in on that? Looks like Vicky may. So Vicky, yeah,
yeah. So my internet connection isn't great, so I did lose some of that description, and I haven't really been following the Monday morning quarterbacking about this, but I'm interested to hear about the troubleshooting process. Was it hard for them? Yeah. Won't tell you who my DNS provider is, but I'm only losing audio, Tom, so it's not my DNS. Anyway, I'm just wondering, I think one of the reasons people blame DNS is because sometimes the troubleshooting process is difficult and complicated and, takes a little while to figure out what it is. Do you have any comments about that? You mentioned, that there was no remediation required in the DNS, but did it take a long time to figure out what the problem was? And
so if you think of the size and scale of that system, okay, the fact that they located the error so quickly, tested and came up with remediations, okay, I think as engineers, we would all be sat there saying, thank God it wasn't me this time.
so it was pretty quick that they...
It was very quick if you think of the size of it. And there's a point. I've had a lot of bite back for taking the stance it's not DNS. And one of the comments that still amuses me came from a cybersecurity professional. And I'll be honest, 99% of the comments that are coming back are from cybersecurity professionals. Okay. And the comment was, firstly, that I'm splitting hairs, that there's no difference between DNS and the automation system. Okay. That I just find a crazy comment. But a startling one for me, which actually sums up why we have this issue, is they said the majority of non-informed people in this world suffered a DNS outage, therefore it's DNS. And you didn't suffer a DNS outage. This wasn't the DNS outage. Okay. And when you have all of that going on one side, and then you have a team on the other side trying to troubleshoot, yeah, I don't think it took them long to realize it wasn't a DNS issue. They sit there. I can tell you they were going, okay, why aren't these records resolving? Let's have a look. Is it in the server? Is the server resolving everything else? Yep. The data isn't there. Right. Why isn't the data there? And they move on quite quickly. I don't think that would have taken them very much. Alexi's just commented in chat. I would argue it was a DNS data issue, not a DNS service issue. You can describe it as that, okay? But here's the thing. I run DNS servers. And one of the things I state is I don't own the data. In the same way a person running a SQL service or a web server doesn't generally own the data that's put into that system. Now, if there's a failure to get that data in or inaccurate, yeah, I don't say that's a DNS issue. Okay, it's a data issue. If a user fails to put information in, that's a user issue, not a problem with DNS as a service.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, being inside AWS, and I wasn't directly involved in this incident, but that is exactly how it's viewed inside. The DNS teams support DNS and its infrastructure and its service. We do not own or contribute to any of the data that goes into it. It's instanced by other people through an API. And if they choose to put the wrong data in, that's what causes a problem.
Yeah, it's not a DNS and not the DNS team's fault.
Yeah. I can see, Tom, you patiently had your hand raised. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to disagree with myself, actually. There's a point in the chat that I thought, well, maybe just DNS is an easy scapegoat, echoing a bit what Vicky said, because it tends to be wrong for a bit after everything else has been sorted. But actually, interestingly, to go to Rennick was talking about what's can't remember whether you use upstream or downstream of the problem as your call out. But actually, the other side of what happened after Dynamo became unavailable because the DNS records were made incorrectly, in that EC2 wasn't available, and then there was cascading failures into load balancers and other things. If you wanted to be a bit picky about it, you could say, well, those should have been immune to that kind of failure. And I think a lot of the failures, like Joe Public felt of, I was trying to get a physio with appointment with Booper on that day, and it just didn't work. A lot of the failures that Joe Public felt, I think, were things like, EC2 instances not being available, or the load balancers going a bit wonky afterwards. And you could very easily say it was like a failure in disaster recovery, or a failure in partitioning systems, as well as the parts that you brought out that happened kind of the other side of the DNS servers.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I said it at the beginning, by blaming DNS, we miss this wonderful opportunity to actually have a discussion about what was important, failures in automation, how that can be mitigated, and how our architectures should be able to take it out. Because a lot of architectures are resilient. I would argue if one of your architectures didn't have some sort of resilient DNS resolution, that's a problem for you. That shouldn't be. But architectures that can take into account, as we've seen here, that failure of a provider. Okay. And there is some people are starting to discuss that. People are saying, you should be in Azure as well as AWS, multi-cloud and so forth. And those are really good discussions to have off the back of this. That doesn't happen if you say DNS was the fault. Yeah. If you say DNS is the fault, then we don't need to look at our architecture. It was DNS that failed.
Also, if it's a provisioning system problem and you have multiple secondaries, you're pushing out the same garbage.
Yeah.
To all of your secondaries. So that doesn't help you in the least. And most provisioning systems have some kind of I don't know what you call it, but a failure prevention thing that says if you're changing more than X number of the records or something like that, stop and require a manual review. I mean, that's a very common thing.
Yeah, we call that velocity control within AWS.
Which is brilliant. Yeah. That's the discussion we should be having.
Mm.
Yeah.
So at this point, I'll say, take those thoughts, any of you in the IETF, either in person or remotely, since they haven't published the agenda yet, I mentioned the DIN-RG, the Decentralization of the Internet Research Group meeting on, I think, Tuesday. That would be a great thing to take into that, because that would be an excellent topic for the sort of research community to get into off the back
Too bad there's not enough time. I could print up some stickers saying it wasn't the DNS. It was never the DNS.
It's not always the DNS.
Yeah.
But okay, well, look, we'll move on there. But I thought that was an interesting sort of little detour. Say, just sometimes it's wrongly accused of being the villain, and I think as Rennick has rightly sort of expounded, that seems to be the case here. In all fairness, and then as Brett mentioned it. There's various coverage. I mean, most of the headlines talk about the DNS, as you'll see. I picked out a couple here, but the bottom one, the very bottom of the screen, that's a link to the update from the AWS team, which gives a rather better, more balanced explanation, should you be interested. Right, just briefly moving on, just keeping an eye on the time. I just wrap up. But on more general news, DNS0.eu closed a few days ago. Completely unrelated to the DNS4 EU, even though the name is quite similar. In fact, some of the news coverage, the one at the top of the screen there, featured a picture of the DNS4 EU logo on a screen, even though it was talking about the DNS0 EU .eu service closing down. Completely confusing matters. They're unrelated. In fact, it's related to NextDNS. Some of the backers of NextDNS were behind DNS0.eu, but that's closed, and they've recommended switching to DNS4EU or indeed NextDNS as an alternative. I won't spend much time on these other things, but the ICANN's extended the deadline for part of the application support program for its next round of TLDs that are coming up. You do have to have got some organizational data in by the 19th of November, but you don't have to complete the process until the 19th of December. So that's an extension. There's a good roundup of the RIPE meeting day by day on the RIPE blog. And then there's other stuff, but we don't have time to talk about it other than the one that's probably at the top of the screen on Nominet, just talking about the potential consequences of losing control of your domain registration, and then really good in a alarming way example of a URL being printed in children's books, which was eventually acquired by an adult content company. Obviously, the children's books are still out there because they're actual physical books. So now if the children go on to that domain in order to access additional related content, they get very different content to what they were expecting. As I say, don't have time to go through other stuff, but if you haven't got these from the mailing list, I'll share these with a link to the recording afterwards. And I will highlight some other fun things. Just briefly, that caught my eye: ad-supported toilet paper. Who could not want ad-supported toilet paper? AdGuard have written up about that. Also on the US government sort of close down, suggested an 85% increase in cyber attacks on the US government on the back of that. And then cheerfully, since we're all now servants of AI, it apparently only takes 250 documents to poison any AI model. According to an article in Dark Reading in the last week. Plenty of other things, but we're about to time out. In terms of deadlines coming up, tomorrow is the deadline if you want to respond to a call for presentations for the NOG. I think that's the Finnish Network Operators Group, and also if you want to comment on the draft sort of governance processes for establishing new regional internet registries, you've got a week to do that. It closes next Friday. I mentioned the ICANN's meeting this week, and then of course we're meeting in Montreal next week, and plenty of other things happening at the moment. Which means next week we won't have a call. We'll catch up the week after, where Libor will join us to talk about DNSSEC validation, and then the 17th we're talking about some of the highlights from the IETF meeting, we've had a chance to draw breath, but plenty of other stuff coming up through to December on that. And I think that's it, other than I didn't say at the start. So thank you to DNS OR for sponsoring these calls. We are pretty much out of time unless anyone wants to jump in with any last comment in the last probably 30 seconds or so. Can't see anyone typing. No one appears to have unmuted to jump in. Nope. So, well, okay. Well, hopefully that was useful. I'll see some of you in Montreal next week. I'm sure Adam Networks are paying for the bar all week. I think I heard David say something to that effect. That'll teach him for not being.
Wow. Wow, you must have some secret information that didn't filter through me.
That's obviously a wild rumor. That's not entirely true. Then.
You've got to prove
I'll
the
take care
Canadians
of
are good
Tom.
hosts, David.
Yeah. Well, I'll take care of you, Tom. So I'll be a good host to you. How's that sound?
That could be pretty expensive, from what I've heard, David. To be honest, even that. No, seriously though, be fun to be in Montreal to see a few people face to face. I look forward to seeing you there if you are, or even online if you're attending remotely. Otherwise, catch up in a couple of weeks. So have a great week in the meantime. See you all. Bye, everyone.
Yes.
Thanks, Andrew. Goodbye.
Bye.